Welcome back to part 2 on happiness. I said in this video we're going to discuss what is the problem, what is really holds us back from being happy. And we said in the last video it basically comes down to the fact that most people are focusing on what they don't have and therefore they don't feel grateful for what they do have. But I want to go into a little bit more detail to really build out a greater sense of clarity as to what's going on. And what it really comes down to is our expectations of the way we feel life should be, the gap between where we are in our lives and where we expect it should be, right? And when there's that gap, we're automatically going to feel life isn't good, and then we're not going to feel happy. And then we've got to decide what we're going to do with that gap. And most people will try and fill up that gap with external stuff to try and make themselves happy. And then you go back into that problem of being an externally based person, relying on outside factors to make us happy. And effectively, we're in a prison as a drug addict, looking for our daily dose of happiness. And when we can't get that daily dose, well, it's very easy to see which kind of way we're going to be living life, and it ain't going to be pretty. So if we're really going to own that internal sense of that rich bank of emotions, and one of them being happiness, then we have to decide how we're going to deal with those gaps, how we're going to deal with those expectations that aren't being met. And I would say there's 3 main areas where we have expectations where there's going to be a gap. The first expectation is the one we have with ourselves, what we expect from ourselves, what we believe we should have, what we believe we should be doing, what we believe we should be involved in, what we believe we should be feeling, what we believe shouldn't be happening to us. The second one is relationships with other people, how we believe other people should be behaving, what we believe other people shouldn't be doing to us. And the third one is the expectation of the world. What should be happening in the greater world? What shouldn't be happening in the greater world? What should be there? What shouldn't be there? And that word should is a very dangerous word, because as soon as we expect that something should be happening and it's not happening, then we have what we call this gap. And that gap is going to create a sense of ungratefulness. And we're not going to be able to appreciate what we can be grateful for, which means we're giving up that internal rich bank of emotions, and we're giving away our power and freedom to feel that one really important emotion of happiness. So we have to learn how to deal with that gap. Now, of course, we're not necessarily going to go into that all in this video. This video is more about just bringing out the danger, what's holding us back, where the trap is, but I will go into it just a little bit. You know, when it comes to the expectation of ourselves, we have to learn to have compassion in that gap. Yeah, you got a great vision of the way your life should be, but if we could do more, we would be doing more. We're trying to do the best we can, and maybe we need to learn some new skill sets, some new understandings about ourselves, but we have to have compassion. We have to realize that life is always going to have a gap. There's never going to be a stage in your life where there's never going to be a gap. That's why rich people still work, because they still want to achieve more. They still want to do more. I don't believe anyone gets to a stage where they say, right, that's it. I'm done. I've achieved everything I want to achieve. I've experienced everything I want to experience. That's it. I'm going to just do nothing, right? People who are really living life, they will always have a greater vision to where they want to get to. So there's always going to be that gap. And the only way to deal with that gap is to have compassion on ourselves and self-acknowledgement for what we've achieved so far. And that it's okay to have a gap with that sense of compassion and self-talk that says, I'm doing the best I can. And there's always going to be a gap in my life because I'm constantly looking to grow and to be more and to feel more and to love more and achieve more. And that's okay. What am I grateful for right now in this moment? What can I be happy about myself? So it's learning a new self-talk, a new self-acknowledgement, a new way of communicating ourselves about that gap. We really need to delete that word should, because should creates a sense of entitlement, which I talked about in the first video, and this sense of it should be this way. And when it's not, well, then that leads to disappointment, which leads to unhappiness. And we're then going to fill it with probably external stuff that makes us a slave, puts us in a prison. So when we learn to deal with that gap, when we learn to deal with the reality that we don't have, that we want to have, that we desire to have, we're going to find it a lot easier to feel gratitude for what we do have. We're going to find it a lot easier to stop focusing on what we don't have and start focusing inwards to what we do have, to build that internal sense of a rich bank account, and one of them is happiness. When it comes to other people, yeah, I agree with you. Some people should behave, all people should behave in a certain way, and people shouldn't do certain things, but they are. And again, we have to explain that gap. And you can look at my intention principle, you can go to my course, you can read my book to understand other people. But again, it doesn't mean we should be a walkover, but it's about having that self-talk of compassion, that they're doing the best they can. Doesn't mean it's right what they're doing. It probably isn't right what they are doing, but they're not doing it on purpose. They're not doing it on purpose. You can't expect people to do more than what they can actually do. And the problem is that we look at people and we see their behaviors, but we don't see their whole lived experience. There's a whole story that's going on behind that behavior. There's years and years and years and years of experiences, stuff they've been exposed to, their upbringing, that leads them to this point. It's not an excuse. Doesn't mean, therefore, people can behave in an immoral or an unhealthy way. But what it does do, it sets us free from the way that they're behaving. And we can give up this notion of that they should be doing this or they shouldn't be doing that, which leaves us with an expectation gap, which means that we're going to have to fill it in with some external sense of happiness, which is only going to punish ourselves. So we have to learn a new talk in the way that we decipher the meaning that we give to these gaps. And when it comes to external people, I can tell you personally, having dealt with some really, really difficult, toxic, and unhealthy people in my life, that as soon as I was willing to drop that word should, because there's many things they should have done and many things that they shouldn't have done, but as soon as I was able to drop that word should and have an acceptance, a sense of compassion that they're doing the best they can. Yes, their behaviors impacted me. Yes, their behaviors were unhealthy towards me, but that's their own problem. And I have just to find a way to deal with those behaviors, either cut off or find a healthy way so that I am secure and okay. But I don't expect them anymore to be any more than their lived experience. It's not an excuse. We're not excusing bad behavior. No, definitely not. We're not going to be a walkover. The whole point is that we're free, that we don't get caught up in this gap, especially when it comes to other people. And as soon as we take this word should out of our dictionary, it takes away an incredible sense of obligation. Now, doesn't mean we shouldn't desire things. It doesn't mean that we should have a vision for greater way of life. We definitely should, but it allows us to have a room for compassion. It allows us to have room for compassion for ourselves, to realize that we're doing the best we can and that other people are doing the best they can as well. And when, again, it comes to the expectation gap of the outside world, again, there's so many things going on that we don't know, right? There's so many moving parts that we're unaware of. It's nothing we can control. It's completely out of our control. So whatever we have in life, we should just be grateful for. Yes, there's things in the world that we wish weren't happening, and some things we can do some things about, some things we just can't. Again, it's learning to have that sense of acceptance, that it is the way it is. I saw a great line from, I think it's Peter Crone. I think that's his first name. His line is that reality is whatever it is. And I say the same thing, that reality is whatever it is, independent if we like it, independent if we ask for it, independent if we want it. It just is. But as soon as we start beating up that reality with ourselves, that our reality should be different, or other people's way of behaving in their own reality should be different, or the reality of the world should be different, we're not dealing with reality. And that's going to make us feel unhappy. That's going to make us feel ungrateful. We're not going to tap into that internal rich bank account of emotions, and instead we're going to have to fill it with external based stuff that only has negative consequences. So we have to really watch our language, start looking in and exploring, how do we deal with the gaps in our lives? Well, let me ask you that question right now. How do you deal with yourself? What expectations do you have of yourself that you're not meeting? And what is the story, the narrative that you're giving it? What is the expectations that you have of other people that aren't being met, that are being trodden on? How are you dealing with that? What is the expectations you have of the greater world, the way the community should be, or the way the country should be, or the way the world should be? How are you dealing with those gaps? Is it a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of denial of reality? Are we taking in the whole people, the whole person? Are we taking in the whole world and realizing that we don't really know what's going on? And learning this ability to accept things for what they are with a sense of compassion, not being a walkover, but a sense of compassion towards ourselves, effectively, because it sets us free. And the more we can own this gap of expectation, not giving up that drive, not giving up that sense of desire and that vision to have more and be more and love more and contribute more and be more fulfilled, but it's taking away that sense of entitlement, that sense of obligation of should. Very dangerous word. We are all doing the best we can. Can we do more? Yeah, tomorrow's a new day. Today's a new day. We can always do more, but we're never going to get more when we're beating up the reality, because that's going to build a negative energy. The only way that we're going to get more, the only way that we're going to fulfill and fill in that gap that we currently have, that will be different a year from now, 6 months from now, is by acceptance. Because when we accept, we're in a better place. And when we're in a better place, our behaviors are going to be more positive and more healthy. So this is all about ourselves. This isn't about giving people a free pass. It's not about that. It's not about giving up on our dreams. It's just the opposite. It's about getting those dreams met, making sure that we're not getting caught up in other people's behaviors or worldwide events. It's about really the ability to take control of what we have, which is ourselves, our mind, our emotions. And the more that we own that gap, the more we'll be able to be internally free, the more we'll be able to experience that sense of happiness. And dropping that word should is a great way going forward. Because again, as I said to you in the previous video, should you have 2 arms? Should you have 2 legs? Should you have a house? Should you have running water? Well, who says you should? Who says you shouldn't? So it's just about appreciating what we have and respecting what is. Respecting the fact that some people behave a certain way because of all their lived experience, and the world is a certain way because of all the billions of moving parts that we have no idea about. And the more we can learn to accept that gap, instead of beating it up, it shouldn't be this way, it should be different, and therefore creating this sense of disappointment and unhappiness, it just is. This is the way that it is. The question is, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to feel? What is my response? What am I going to own about myself? And when we start owning that gap, we become emotionally free to be a better person, to achieve more, but more importantly, to feel that really incredible feeling of happiness. But, just to add in an extra point, it's so easy to see what other people have, especially in the world today of social media. People put out their best pictures, right? I was recently listening to a talk on TED Talk, and the guy was saying, very interesting talk, about the concept of expectations, that, when you see a holiday resort advertised on Facebook, they put out their best pictures. They're not going to put out the picture when it's raining. They're going to put out the picture when it's sun shining, the best looking person they can think of to be in that photo shoot. So it creates this kind of imagination of what should be, and when we get there, it doesn't quite match it. Again, we feel disappointed, even though we're in a luxurious place. So again, it all comes down to this expectation, and it's about exploring what's real, what's fair, right? It's not fair to expect, to a certain extent, it's not fair to expect people to be different to what they are. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's right. But they are who they are, based upon their lived experience. And had you gone through their lived experience, maybe you'd be the same way they are. Not guaranteed, but there's a clear link between people's behaviors now and everything that they've experienced. Not an excuse, but it's definitely explainable. It makes it understandable, right? It's about looking at ourselves as well and having compassion on ourselves and saying, look, I understand why I'm struggling with this gap. I look at my experiences, I look at the things I've heard, things I've been exposed to. It makes sense I'm struggling with these certain things. What am I going to do to overcome those things? How am I going to grow? Instead of beating up that gap, instead of beating up the things that should or shouldn't be, we need to create a new mindset. And that mindset is, number one, what am I grateful for right now in this moment? But number two, what do I have to become? What do I have to do? What do I have to learn to deal and get what it is I want? How do I need to learn to deal with difficult people? Instead of getting caught up in their behavior, what have I got to do to deal with their behavior, both internally and externally? So if we want to be truly emotionally free, and we want to be able to experience that feeling of happiness, what we all want for ourselves and we all want for our kids, then we have to really own our focus. The one thing that we can decide, one thing we can own is what we decide to focus on. And a lot of that's going to be determined by how we deal with the gap. How we deal with that gap. If we beat up that gap and we beat up reality for what it is, and we don't have much compassion, then we're not going to have much compassion on ourselves, and we're going to fill it with stuff on the outside world, which makes us a slave, puts us in a prison with negative consequences. But if we start learning to respect that gap, the reality is what it is, independent if it's fair, independent if we ask for it, independent if we want it, it just is. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And what are we going to be grateful for right now in this moment for what we do have? Then we're going to have the best chance of being truly happy, which is what we all really do deserve, to be happy. We were born happy. Kids are born happy. They fall over, they get straight back up because they just want to live life. They don't get caught up in the disappointments. They just want to go out there and experience the most. So effectively what I'm saying is we all need to become children again. I'm not saying we should wear nappies and drink from bottles, but we should adopt that attitude of it is what it is. Let's just make the most of it. Let's just stop expecting things to be anything more than they are and start looking at the whole picture, other people's lived experience, our lived experience, start having compassion on ourselves and other people, not a walkover, but that internal freedom, having compassion and not getting caught up in world events and other people's behaviors and not beating ourselves up for what we're not doing. Let's start focusing on what we have done. Again, this focus of, instead of what isn't going well, this focus of what is going well. It's a theme, not just with happiness, but it's a theme throughout life. And you can conquer this theme of focusing on what you do have with happiness. It's going to be a theme, a style of thinking that is going to serve you greatly in every area of life, in your relationships, in your business, in weight loss, instead of focusing on where you're not, focusing on how far you have become. Own that internal bank of rich emotions, and you have the ability to feel happiness every single day, something that money can truly not buy. I know very wealthy people, I know people who have achieved so much, but they're not happy. If you can feel that happiness internally, you are in the top % of the world, because it's the one thing people want. Same too with self-worth. If we can own those feelings, we are rich beyond imagination, beyond imagination. No matter what we have, if we don't have these emotions, we are going to be poor and weak. Doesn't matter how strong you are physically, if you don't have this sense of happiness, a sense of self-worth internally, we are really just beggars. So if we want to be really emotionally free, if we really want to be strong and rich, let's start looking inwards. Let's start focusing on what we do have, what we have achieved, what we can do.